just a few days left to register for the first signature event of the year, the Winter Leadership Ethics Luncheon at Gallup, Thursday, February 13th. Developing an Ethical Identity is the topic, featuring speakers from Gallagher, GH Smart, and the Better Business Bureau, giving advice on maintaining a lasting ethical identity for a very special Creighton MBA student as a send-off before he starts his full-time role. You can find tickets online at businessethics.alliance.org/events. Hope to see you there. Ethics-based tickets are now available. The biggest single-day business ethics conference in the Midwest, I think probably the world. I'd like to see the data on that. Hosted at Creighton's Hyder College of Business. The topic is Cutting Edge Ethics, featuring keynote speaker John Carreyrou, the Wall Street journalist who exposed the Theranos blood testing scandal. Sorry, John, I hope I said your last name correctly, sir. You might have seen this covered in documentaries about Elizabeth Holmes on your favorite streaming platforms. So John is going to come and deliver a keynote speech about what's been happening since the case was publicized. And I'm pretty sure she's in prison now, so might be some new updates there. Later, he'll also be sitting on a panel as a journalist talking about the changing media ethics. So you don't want to miss your chance to hear from him. We are expecting hundreds of people, and as a special thank you for listening, if people use the code WALKTHETALK, that is Walk the Talk, all one word, all capitalized, they will get extended access to early bird pricing through February 21st. Breakout speakers to be announced, breakfast and lunch is included. Tickets online at ethicsspace.org, that is ETHICSPACE.org, or businessethics.alliance.org/events, and click on the Ethics Space Conference. Hope to see you there. All right. Welcome to another episode of Business Ethics Walk the Talk. I am your host, Blake Peterson, and thank you so much for joining me here today. I've got another great guest on the show, Dar Andrews. You're going to hear a lot about his past experience. This man has accomplished many things in his life. Just wrote a fantastic book that we're going to really dive into. That's all about really optimizing your systems through the total experience, the total client experience, and making sure you help you scale and grow your business, take it to the next level. So a little background on Dar. He is a native Nebraskan who grew up and working in his family stable and aiding local farmers. After studying at the University of Kansas and the University of Cambridge, England, he graduated with a Bachelor of Science degree from the University of Nebraska-Lincoln. His 30-year career spans leadership roles with eBay, Gateway Inc., Home Instead Inc., PayPal, Sunstrand Aerospace, and U.S. Leather. He's currently the CIO at NEI Global. He has a background in both finance and information technology. Dar currently enjoys living on his farm in eastern Nebraska with his wife and twin daughters. He's active in various consulting and community endeavors. His hobbies are farming, outdoor sports, and he still loves mentoring. It remains one of his main passions, mentoring business owners and people who run businesses at all levels. So I hope you enjoyed the episode. I think there's a lot you can gather from it and apply to your own business, whether you own or operate or work within one. So on with the show. Well, Dar, thank you so much for joining me today, taking time out of your schedule to be here.
Well, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
Well, I'll tell you, I mean, after we met at the coffee shop and kind of talked a little bit about your book, I thought you'd be such a great guest to come on and talk about, first of all, your new book, Total Experience, here that you've just, when did you publish it, the official date?
September 10th was the official date.
September 10th, 24. And I have read it and I thought it was great. I thought it was fun. It was easy to read. It wasn't full of like corporate jargon that I couldn't understand. There was real actionable processes and suggestions hidden within here, even references to certain technologies and platforms you should look into as you're trying to scale and put procedures in place, which is great because that's not common, I find, in all these books.
It's not. And it's the what was part of the impetus for me writing it was my stepson was going to school at one of the Nebraska colleges and was getting into his MBA program. And I was kind of quizzing him. It's like, are they, how are you guys learning about this, that, and the other thing? And he's like, well, we're not learning anything about that. And I'm like, oh my gosh, how can you not be?
Right.
So as I've dug into it and realized that there was a gap. So, yeah.
Absolutely. And that is, well, you have such incredible experience, and there's a lot of qualities in those MBA programs, and they do a lot of great things, but there's no substitute for the real life experience that you have. And maybe we can start with that. Can you give a little bit of just a quick synopsis of your background and
Sure.
what led you down the path of being able to write a book like The Total Experience?
Sure. Well, I native of Nebraska, and graduated from UNL. Started working in actually for the Treasury Department, doing auditing national banks, and broke out of that and got into manufacturing, doing a lot of accounting for an aerospace company that had operations here in Nebraska, and spent a fair amount of time kind of bouncing around a couple other opportunities and landed up with Gateway Computers up north. Mm-hmm. And that really pulled me into basically the IT space. I'd always been leading as a controller for a lot of the manufacturing firms that I worked for. I had IT responsibility, but I wasn't knee deep into it. Mm-hmm. And with Gateway, I got tied into their Y2K effort.
Ooh.
Lots of fun.
I'll bet.
On a very aggressive timetable. And we completed it. Got it working well, and then took that experience and moved on to a company that was also in manufacturing, but vertical manufacturing, called IDEX, and they're still very, very large and very, very profitable. But needing to get back into the area in Nebraska, I thought I had an opportunity to jump back in with eBay and PayPal.
Right.
And so what I thought was going to be about a 5-year, hey, this will look great on a resume type thing, it turned into really 13 years in total, which had various levels towards the end of the career. Well, I had led the separation of PayPal from eBay from the IT perspective, which was just it's still a blur. 9 months of... Yeah. 9 months of you spend 4 or 5 years bringing everything together on similar platforms and similar systems. Yeah. And then you get 9 months to rip it all apart and separate it all out. So, wild. But yeah, it was wild. Stayed on the PayPal side. Mm-hmm. And like I said, after about 13 years, it's time for a change. And I had, shortly thereafter, I had an opportunity with Home Instead. Mm-hmm. And love that. Phenomenal company, phenomenal leadership, and phenomenal owners. Yeah. And spent 3.5 years with them, and then jumped out of there, and I'm now with NEI Global Relocation, which is part of NP Dodge. Yeah,
it's incredible, man. Yeah. So what a resume! It's fantastic.
It's been wonderful. I've been blessed.
You've also, when you've worked for these, incredibly large companies in comparison to what many people might be used to, but you've also come in at maybe not ground floor, but you've seen a huge scale along your way. And that's kind of been a core part of your book, is how do you scale and how do you grow? And so it would make sense that every place you've gone, you've kind of helped them level up and get to the next step, it would appear.
Yes. Yeah. And I say I've been blessed. Working for some of those companies, like Sunstrand was a 100-year-old company when I joined them, which was crazy, but they had the deep processes and a DoD supplier, and then jumping into an entity like PayPal, where, Gateway was as well for a period there, but PayPal, when I joined in 2006, they had just been bought by eBay, were trying to get assimilated. Their growth rate, even prior to the mobile phone coming out and really launching their mobile app, was still, 40, 50% a year, in terms of volume. Yeah. And so, it was hair on fire and just, trying to scale. Yeah. A lot of business owners. And I've seen that with some of the smaller entities working with the franchises as well, where it's like, okay, you kind of hit that plateau, and now how do I scale to actually grow to that next level? Right. So there's a lot of tips and tricks in there in terms of practical knowledge, not only for the startups, but also for some of those leaders that are in those mega-sized corporations as to, oh, so that's what they mean when they're talking about this aspect of customer experience or this aspect of management.
Yeah, absolutely. And I love, on the front cover, even it says for total experience, operational excellence, multi-user experience, employee experience, and customer experience. And it has how those all kind of intertwine with one another. And I think it's very common for people to believe all of those as their own separate thing, right? And so
Agreed.
Is this, over the years, is this something that you just naturally developed? Was this something that somebody else kind of taught you?
So it was something that somebody else taught me, candidly, and there was a handful of phenomenal business leaders that I do reference a couple in the book. But in honesty, Gartner Inc., which is one of the research firms, does consulting, but also is like the benchmark for doing software analysis and whatnot. They really came up with this concept or the term, the methodology of total experience in the 2020 timeframe, late 2020. And really what it represents is just exactly what you described. It's, a lot of business leaders feel like, hey, if we satisfy the customer, we're done. That was kind of the Zappos model.
Yeah.
And in reality, I learned along the way that it was, the clients, yes, but your employees, you have to assess how your decisions are going to affect them.
Yeah.
As well as your multi-users, which strategic partners, pick your term, but that's your bankers, that's your insurance agents, could be a regulatory agency, that you have to be in, supporting.
Yeah.
And then finally, the operational excellence of it, well, that's just the business itself.
Yeah.
And so kind of encapsulating that whole landscape of stakeholders in when you're making a business decision and making it, understanding that there's going to one aspect of that may end up being, severely impeded, where another side of it may be benefited. So you have to kind of balance those things out. So
yeah, and you referenced multiple times in the book how it's important to, once you identify the problem and you come up with the solution and you do the implementation, how you need to focus on one thing at a time.
Right.
And if you just try to have the shotgun approach, I think it might be a phrase that you use in the book, it's going to oftentimes fall flat. And then you just think, well, this isn't working. This is all a joke. Right. It's not important. And so when you're doing consulting, and even for you now, I mean, you're still obviously working with NEI Global and whatnot. How do you try to direct your team? And when you're thinking about attacking each one of these, but going one by one, how do you quantify or qualify, I guess, which is most important at any given point in time? And how do you work with other, even business owners of smaller startups or franchises to help them identify where to go first?
Well, out of the gate, you should know, those aspects of your business. What are your goals? And so you should have a strategy. Throughout my career, I've been blessed. I've had a number of companies that have had maybe a 5-year, eBay, PayPal use 3 years. Gateway probably was even a little bit shorter than that, maybe 18 months.
Right.
But I think having that strategy and understanding where you want to take the business is the first step.
Yeah.
And then on top of that, it's basically understanding, okay, well, we've got tactical aspects of how we're going to get there. And yeah, when you're getting into those decisions about prioritizing, it's sort of like, okay, what is my near-term business value? And, with every decision that you're going to make, there's probably going to be some negative aspect. Can the business survive that? So a lot of times when I'm dealing with my current peers, we're trying to map our activities for the IT organization to map to that strategy. And then, often it's not, hey, it's not that we're not going to do it. It's just that we can't do it right now.
Right.
And so how do we time phase this out?
Yeah. How do we get there? And it's important, I think, that people know this book is definitely not meant for any one size of organization, right? It can be implemented for all kinds. In fact, it might even be more beneficial for the smaller group to take a look at the book and read it and find out how they can adopt some of these strategies, because they don't have a larger team of professionals who might have the seasoned experience like you may have had at some of these other companies. So, but we are, of course, a podcast about ethics.
Yes.
And so how do you think, the total experience in general, the topic of the book, what you are helping people learn from the book, really ties into business ethics as a whole?
Throughout the book, I've touched on the need, or the critical need, for ethics. And at the end, I actually make a plea, for business leaders as well as educators to lean into the aspect. I think in today's environment, we just don't teach business ethics in general, the way we maybe did 20, 30, 40 years ago. A lot of that was, theoretically, happening in the home. And I think a lot of it still does. Yeah. But in certain aspects, we need the business leaders to really reinforce that. And yes, as far as I would make the argument throughout the text that if you are not acting in an ethical manner, it's not a question, can you survive? You probably can for a period of time, but your growth is going to be hampered in quickly. Yeah. You're going to end up finding yourself struggling with employee issues and or business strategic partner issues. Yeah. And it's just a matter of really approaching all your decisions and all your activities in that fashion. Right. And I'm one of those in my history with all of my positions. I'd much rather be identified as being fair to the employees, fair to the customers, and fair to the business. Right. Than I would to be identified as being uberly successful or exceptionally what do I want to say? Growth oriented. I think that fairness, growth will come, and profitability will come if you bring fairness to your decision making and to your business ethics, into your overall operations. Yeah, I mean, it's well said, and I think that with a couple pieces on always having that business ethics at the top of mind, have you ever advocated to your companies that you've worked with to maybe be more outward with their ethical views or what they're doing in that regard? And because what I'm imagining, right now at this current moment, we just had the unfortunate murder of the United Healthcare CEO, and I see people cheering it on online, and I think that people have a perception of all these companies and all these people, they're bad people. Right. But for all you know, that man could have been a champion of his clients, who are the providers, and which, by the way, is probably one of the hardest industries to possibly navigate, would be being a healthcare company, right? And so I imagine, would it be any different if they were more outward to their clients and to the people of the world? This is what we are doing and how we operate from an ethical standpoint. What's our core values, in a sense? I would argue yes. So many times I think the large entities like that don't have a good means of channeling those, I don't want to call them complaints, but channeling those issues in an effective manner, up through the chain. Right. And I don't remember what United Healthcare made, $440 billion or something like that. It's just, it's astronomical. Mm-hmm. But with that kind of a size, if they're not really embracing customer service and ethics deliberately, they're going to run into problems. Right. And you would hope that there's not that kind of a severe problem that comes into play. And I hope other companies never experience that same event. It was horrific. Yeah. But there have been, I've worked around leaders that have been of the mindset, well, if the regulators don't have a problem with us acting in this manner, then we're probably okay.
Right.
And my position on that has typically been, well, you may be, again, for a very short period of time, but you're going to start paying for that decision, in the long run in some form or fashion.
Yeah.
And that was one of the things I guess I would say I really applauded, the PayPal leadership at the time of separation, that they were adamant that, hey, we want to get this right. And if we end up having an impact on our customers, we want to lean into making it fair and equitable for them.
Right.
So I applauded it. I experienced a few other similar events in the eBay side, and obviously going way back. In the book, I highlight that one of the companies that I worked for was Sunstrand Aerospace, and they had the notoriety in the late 1980s for being fined the largest amount for any company in U.S. history up to that point in time.
Oh no!
For DoD problems, yeah. And in that setting, the board took all the right actions. They hired Harry Stonecipher from the Boeing days to basically try and remedy it and bring it back online and up the ethics game.
Yeah, you
could argue, well, he was a disciple of Jack Welch, so maybe he had some opportunities to work on some things himself too.
Yeah,
but I was in one particular setting where one of the plant sites that I was supporting had continued to do some of that unethical activity that they had been fined for. And I was in a meeting where he actually found out about it. It was one of those plant site visits, and when the screaming and hollering and there was actually a pop can that was thrown across the room at someone and it hit him, and I'm like,
wow.
I'm like this 24-year-old analyst that happens to be in the room, and I'm like, where can I crawl and find a place to hide?
Yeah.
But it really solidified. He was passionate about, hey, we just got fined this massive amount. What are we doing trying to go and bring it back? Continue to do those same operations.
Right.
And to his credit, he turned that company around to the point where they did become one of the standards for, the DoD and operations and how we actually performed operations going forward and then performed our accounting.
Right.
And, but yeah, it's to kind of come back to it. It's, I think, permeating throughout the entire ecosystem now going forward. I believe, really these last couple of years, it's been a struggle. We've seen university presidents that have been, held accountable for, plagiarism, not just once, but multiple times.
Right.
And it begs the question, well, what are we teaching, these kids? And so kind of coming back to my stepson who graduated with his MBA and is doing great. He's now approaching life, with some of those reflections that, I think he's not the only one. There's going to be a lot of others, in this next generation. I've got tremendous hope that it's going to be, maybe it's not going to be a light switch event, but I do sense that as a culture, we're going to move more aggressively towards that ethical behavior.
Yeah, I really hope so. I'm always optimistic. I like to see the world through an optimistic lens, and I agree that the next generation of workers, and it was a complaint for a long time, and I'm a millennial, so I guess I'm included in it, but where it's there was a lot of people from many generations where it was like, you need to shut up, go to work, do your job, work your way up the ladder, and if the boss says it, you just keep your head down and keep going, and that doesn't really fly anymore, right? It is. I mean, I'm sure industries can differ, but for the most part, that people are not looking to be a part of that.
Right.
And it's also tough to get away with it because they can tweet something out there, and now it's made public to the world on what's happening inside your company, and people vote with their dollars.
Yep.
And so even if it's not something from a regulatory standpoint that comes down, maybe you're going to lose a lot of business because people just don't want to fund a company that's doing those things, right? And I know you had a whole, chapter talking about artificial intelligence as well. And there was a lot of ethics kind of woven into that. And so you're now, as the CIO at NEI, you have, I'm sure, a lot on your plate, and you have to make a lot of decisions. You're helping them improve processes, and AI is really just flourishing into something that is powerful.
Yes.
And with that, there has to be a lot of dilemmas that you have to face, and real conversations you have to have before you implement it. How are you dealing with artificial intelligence implementation, all of that from an ethical perspective?
Yeah, I enjoyed one of your earlier podcasts with
Laurel Otkin. Yeah, about AI. Yes.
And I think her perspective was spot on. First, companies have to really have a policy in place as to how they're going to interact with AI, with generative AI in particular. I mean, the reality is today everyone is touching AI. Anytime you do a search engine, anytime you're interacting with your bank, they've got AI enabled. Not so much exposing your PII information, but they are, when you call in, they're trying to ascertain, oh yeah, it's Blake that's calling in, and how can we quickly, help support Blake, and what might he be calling us for? Those types of assessments are being performed by AI. Yeah. And so in our space, when I joined here earlier this year, actually, we established a policy for generative AI. We selected those particular engines that we felt were probably going to be best for our initial activities. Mm-hmm. But then we also went into a training program with our employees, because there is a harsh reality that, once an AI engine, for the most part, has learned something from your data structure, it's out in the public. You might as well have just posted it out in your front door.
Right.
And so, we're very diligent in that respect. I am excited that there are a lot of companies out there. Private AI is one that's doing a lot of work in the space of masking PII and masking transactions. Mm-hmm. They're still allowing some interaction with those financial institutions.
Right.
And there are a ton of companies that are now getting into, like, the customer service space, that are actually blending AI engines to facilitate more lifelike experiences, even so much as having an engine that knows when to pause versus when to exemplify something, a statement or something.
Right.
And so the way we're approaching it is through the training, also through some of the cybersecurity monitoring in terms of what is being communicated between the platforms,
right?
As well as just looking for ways, like as an example, Meta's got a product that they're still offering, and interestingly enough, it's for free, where you can basically download their engine. It's not huge, but it's not like a ChatGPT engine, but it's still decently sized, encapsulated in your environment, so that it's not exposed externally to the web. And then use that engine, train it up to interact with your specific data.
Yeah.
That's the kind of thing that I think for a small business or mid-sized business in the near term is where there's going to be tremendous value.
Yeah.
Those organizations that are integrating with OpenAI or some of these other engines that have, integration tools with them, whether it's Claude or some of these others that are out there, I think, they just got to be really, really careful in terms of how much data or how much, even some of their training materials, how much they really want to expose. Because if it's truly a strategic advantage to your company in terms of how you're processing your business transactions that maybe your competitors don't know about, well, do you really want that out with an engine that can be tapped?
Yeah, absolutely. I think in my world, and I'm currently a chief compliance officer, and so doing an email monitoring is challenging because you really are using a bunch of keywords and it flags wrong messages.
Right.
It's usually a waste of your time, quite frankly, because it's not finding anything specific. And I know there's a new company out there. I mean, they just launched. It's like it's beautiful because it's like, hey, it will learn what it shouldn't be flagging and what it will, and it will really drive down and be a lot more valuable data that it brings back to you. But to your point, it's like, I can't expose all of our emails to this model yet, because goodness, I really don't know. I don't understand it well enough to know that it's all going to stay internal. And people are obviously sending us some pretty private information through those channels. And so even though sometimes you wish they wouldn't, because emails aren't that safe either, but that's getting to the point. I mean, it's here, it's knocking on our doorstep. And I feel like if you don't adopt it in certain ways, you're going to get left behind. And I wonder because you did a training with your employees, and your employees understanding that you're moving in this direction. Is there any talk of concern on, like, oh, they're going to replace us with this AI engine? Is that coming up in these talks?
It hasn't been expressed in the training itself, but I think there's enough publicity out there about what, whether it's Musk's, Tesla AI and what he's doing in his factories, with robotics, as well as the self-driving automobiles, the self-driving semi-trucks that they're talking about. Yeah. The coding, we've seen tremendous efficiencies in developing code. It's coming. And so now it's a question of I think, and this is, at least for like the IT team members on my team that I've had an opportunity to chat with about, just how things are changing and what's coming. It's an opportunity for us to start looking at how do we grow our skills in those other areas. And to your point, when you talk about somebody being left behind, I equate it to, and with the leadership team, the idea of not embracing AI at this point would be like a company in the 1920s saying, well, this newfangled thing called a telephone, we're just not going to use that because we prefer to interact with our customers and that, face to face. Well, that's great. Right. But, today, if somebody said, well, hey, even though a lot of people would throw their phones out the window, it's like, hey, you're not going to be able to use this telephone. It's like, what do you mean? Yeah. Absolutely. Use it. So yeah, it's a tool. And I think that I hope it will evolve. There's always a fear that these jobs are going to be destroyed in any innovation. This is not new. No. This is something that's been around for probably hundreds of years. That's for sure. Probably going back to even, the first industrial revolution, there was probably some concern there, but it's always managed to continue to grow. And I know of some companies where roles were these coding individuals, they kind of are moving into more of a relationship role, right? Because now it's like, look, we can do all this a lot easier, but if we're going to be able to do everything faster, we need to take even better care of our customers. And that's where you're going to come in, and you have that knowledge. So like you said, learning it and always being a learner so you can develop new skills and adapt to the changing environment. It's going to be more important than ever, right? But I agree. And I think there's going to be, for every job that may be absorbed by an AI entity or engine capability, there's probably going to be 2 or 3 more that are actually developed that we haven't even thought about. Yeah. One area that I've seen and I've heard about actually, and I haven't had a chance to actually demo it yet, but there's a company that's blending, as I mentioned, AI engines for different aspects of the customer service activity. And that activity in and of itself has become essentially an engineering science, much the way that prompt engineering is becoming its own science. Right. And so I think there's tremendous opportunity. But it does make me kind of worry and wonder. I've got my daughters are 13. That it's like, okay, how do I direct them to be ready for this next revolution, as it were. Yeah. And so we're leaning heavily into mathematics. We're still leaning heavily into language, and we're still leaning heavily into logic and those areas. Yeah. But yeah, it's going to change. It's going to change fast over the next couple of years. It is.
That was the conversation not very long ago, is you better learn how to code. Because if you can't code, you're going to be left behind. And then it was like, oh, anybody can code. Right. Right. It happened overnight. And now it's not perfect yet, But, my wife created an incredible website.
Oh, yeah.
All by herself. I don't know what we pay for a monthly basis for that service, but it's a lot cheaper than a coding engineer would have been, right? So
exactly.
Yeah, it's here. But, with you working so many, positions over time, so many different companies at so many different sizes, but very large, you've managed to keep yourself very approachable. It appears, right? We met for coffee. One of your employees and a great friend of mine was the one who connected us, and so obviously, she felt comfortable enough to come to you and to have that conversation. And I'm sure it's been that way at all the companies you've worked in. I mean, how do you manage that? Because you are in a leadership role, you have a job to do. You're also going to be probably doing some things that maybe not everybody agrees with along the way. But how do you maintain that kind of open door policy and make sure your employees feel comfortable coming to you and having a real conversation with you? I
think you have to be deliberate from the get-go. And so one of the first things when I joined NEI, I made it a point. It was more important for me to spend one-on-one time with everyone in the organization, in my IT organization, than it was to kind of hit some of the leaders across the various organization. Because obviously, which is maybe, I wouldn't say unique, but it was a lesson that I learned a number of years ago from a couple of really outstanding leaders, that you're only going to be, as a business leader, you're only going to be as good as your team as a whole.
Right.
And so you better get that. You better check that box and make sure that they know you're approachable, and that, hey, here's my goals. Mm-hmm. Here's how your goals might fit into where we want to go. And nothing's, formally baked, when you first join, but you already have some vision of how you think you might be able to help the business or help the organization.
Yeah.
But then I think the other side of it is just, and I'm maybe a little biased, but I think maybe having that Midwest background and, kind of growing up in this area, you hear that from people actually visiting, whether it's Nebraska, South Dakota, Iowa, you name it, in the Midwest, that were, generally very approachable. And I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
So
they also tell me that I talk slow sometimes.
Well, there you go.
Yeah, yes. I guess we do. We're a little more relaxed
yes,
here, but it's all right. I'll take the slow talk. But I think it's important to have that kind of a relationship where obviously there's boundaries and whatnot, but you need to be able to have some approachable nature, or else they also might not have as much of an emotional connection with the company itself if they don't feel like they can connect with the people they work for. And in your book, you mentioned, an onboarding process in which, one hiring manager, and I think this will be a great topic for people listening if they are growing and they're thinking about hiring and what does that look like? Because and I've been a part of a business where you get hired on and it's like, what is your role? And it's like, well, it's not really defined yet. And it's this, and I get it. I mean, that's some people, that's just how small businesses are many times. And that's how it goes. But as you grow and evolve and you need to kind of have more efficient processes in place so people know when they sign on, what they're signing up for, what their expectations are, what would qualify this as a successful interaction versus that. So for people who are just getting to that stage, they're going to be growing and hiring, how do you recommend they go through that process, and what should you start by doing, before you make the hire, leading up to it? What are the things you need to have in place so that you can make sure you bring that person on effectively?
Well, I'm still going to go back to the, your business goals, having those defined, figuring out how this new position, or if it is a new position, how that's going to, how you want it to influence the goals. Through that hiring process, that you should have a pretty healthy job description that defines, hey, here's what you're going to be doing. For the most part, obviously things, especially in a small business, you're wearing 5, 6, 7 different hats often.
Yeah.
But I think then the other, you touched on it perfectly, and that's the having defined what success criteria really means for that. And it may, and you could be clear that, hey, for the first 6 months, here's kind of the way this is looking. We'll have to reassess after 6 months and see how it looks from that point forward.
Right.
But because it's probably not going to be cast in concrete, but I think that's really the start. And then, in the book, the 2 experiences that I mentioned, one is, hey, someone was so forthright as to explain, not only, take the time to define all that, meet with me on the first, day of, first hour and a half of my employment. We went through all this. And not only did I understand kind of what I would be doing, what was expected, but I also got a fairly good understanding of what the boundaries were in terms of, hey, here's how we're going to interact.
Yeah.
And that transparency was phenomenal. He was one of my favorite leaders of all time.
Yeah.
Conversely, I've had some folks that have hired me into roles, and it's like, okay, well, here's your, there's your chair, or, and now go figure out what it is you're doing. And it's like, well, that's not quite cool,
Yeah, right.
So I think it just, it depends on the leader themselves and what their personality is, but right. to make those interactions, get them off to the right start. I'm a huge fan of setting the goals, setting the expectations, and then setting the parameters for how we interact going forward. Yeah,
I think that can be, and not all personalities jive that way, right? And that's okay. There's different people, and it's not always critical, but at the same time, if you're going to want to take that next step and you want to go from a 5 employee to a 15 to a 20, you're going to waste a lot of money if that new employees are sitting around doing a lot of maybe not nothing, but not what they should be doing with their time until they finally figure it out.
Agreed.
Right. And you talk, about that. You give some tips on how do you quantify, where you're going to invest in, whether you're going to actually invest in giving your current employees a raise versus, going out, hiring new ones, how to kind of do some back of the napkin math on that. I think will help people. You talk a lot about when you're actually creating these processes and procedures, how you need to structure those goals, which we kind of talked about earlier as well. And one of the structural pieces that you mentioned during our coffee conversation was getting feedback from your customers and surveys, right? And I thought it was interesting because I'm the type of person, I'm prompted for surveys often. Usually I'm hanging up the phone. Now I'll do surveys when I get some incredible experience. Right. I'm like, this person just saved me. I need to tell somebody they did a great job. And conversely, when I had a terrible experience, and that's when I'm feeding it. So can you maybe talk a little bit about, when you started to implement that, what you learned from it, and why you think it's so important to try to be getting that customer feedback on a regular basis? Well,
and to be clear, I think it's important to get feedback from your customers, your employees, and probably your strategic partners as well.
Yeah.
But that whole industry is changing pretty dynamically. In years past, I would say years past, it was the face-to-face conversations, and those are great. You can get a lot of great information, but sometimes, vendors or clients will be much more, apt to give you candid feedback if it's written, or if it's, or if they have the opportunity to do it through like an email process, and that's where the industry kind of went. Mm-hmm. But now that whole survey process is changing to where it's any channel that's out there, you can actually develop a survey against it. And I know from like the PayPal days, they, one of the challenges that we had in the, 2014, 2015, 2016 timeframe, they had, they were doing everything by email. But the response rates for the email by that point in time, it was kind of like, oh my gosh, nobody wants any more email.
Yeah.
Was, 24, 25% at best. And they were considered, that was awesome. With, there's a lot of science that went into how you define the email and structure it and how many questions.
Yeah.
Well, then we went to doing SMS texting and actually adding surveys at the end of our voice contacts through an IVR interaction. And suddenly, the survey quality went up dramatically because we weren't just getting the ones that were exceptionally happy or the ones that were exceptionally mad at us for some aspect.
Yeah.
You were getting sort of that middle ground population of folks as well. And, but yeah, if you're not getting data and feedback in terms of how your customers view you and how your employees view you and how your strategic partners are dealing with you, then you're probably, again, you're running your business blind.
Right.
It's like driving down the road with goggles on and not being able to see, anything but the center line. You're running a risk.
Yeah, and you don't know what you don't know at the same time. And there's some pieces in your book talking about data that you're collecting and you're using to actually guide your, business decisions. But to be fair, and you mentioned a lot of people, they're focusing, okay, what is our revenue?
Right.
What was it last year? What is it this year? How's it going forward? Well, how do you start to, drill down and find those more important, KPIs and things that you want to use to really define success and to focus on, how can a smaller business that may not have the resources of an eBay or PayPal, how should they start looking at those things?
It can be very, very simple. It can just be a checkbox on understanding what question or what data element you're looking to get, and it can be just a tick mark, and then summarizing your tick marks at the end of the day. But if you're going to do any type of process improvement, you better understand how well things are going now, and have some metric to measure against.
Right.
And because profitability can be good, but in the book I mentioned an example where profitability was continuing to go up, which was great, but the entity that was kind of monitoring this, we didn't have the right metric, and so suddenly revenue's going up, profitability staying about flat, but market share is dropping off, and you can only sustain that for a certain amount of time before it becomes catastrophic. And so,
absolutely, you're not paying attention to the real growth indicator, or should have been, is exactly where will our business be 5 years from now, and then once you figure it out, gosh, you hope you figure it out soon enough that you can save it.
Exactly.
You mentioned, working with business coaches as well, and the importance of that. And I think first of all, it's an expense. Obviously, you may have a hard time finding the right one, but it can also be so invaluable when it comes down to just the return on investment.
Yep.
By having somebody who can guide you on this path. So what has been your experience working as a business coach, or if you ever worked with a business coach, and how would you recommend people kind of start going down that avenue?
So it's almost finding the right business coach for you can be almost like moving into a new area and trying to find a new church or a new dentist. There's a lot of options out there, and whether or not it's quite the right fit, but it doesn't always have those coaches. A lot of times, like in the franchise world, you have a lot of peer franchise owners that you can lean into and actually get a tremendous amount of coaching that doesn't cost you anything but a little bit of time. And the hope is that you're going to, when you become experienced as an owner or business owner, that you're going to share that with new ones coming into the network.
Right.
Well, that same thing can apply, I think, within community areas. Generally, there are a number of business leaders that will do some mentoring with, they're not going to spend hours at it, but if you need a half an hour with them on a specific topic, most folks are going to be, generally helpful.
Definitely.
But as far as, selecting that coach that's going to be someone that you're going to actually invest in and pay money for. Well, I'm a huge fan of having referrals. So if you start talking with folks that their business is doing well, and you can start asking them, hey, are you working with somebody? Right. And if so, how can I get in touch with them, because I could use the same help? Yeah, that's a good idea. I think I'm if a personal trainer, I'm going to hire someone who looks how I want to look like. Exactly. You know what I mean? It is the way it is. So go to the person you want to be and kind of ask them at first. And exactly. I think that in the Midwest, like you said, the culture of sharing will hopefully be, people will be pretty open, right? And as long as you're not a direct competitor, and even if you are, if they're comfortable with themselves and their business, I hope they still would be able to, reach out and help you along the way. I think I enjoyed the book. I liked it. It's a quick read for anybody out there. You can definitely get through it. You can go back and everything's broken down into very small chapter segments with breakdowns in between. So I think that it's not something that you have to necessarily read cover to cover. You could always hop back in and out
go to segments that you're working on at any given time, which I liked about it. You also had a great quote in there that if a ship is safest when it's at its port, but that's not what ships are built for.
Right.
Which that if it wasn't for that quote, I wouldn't be with my wife right now. That quote actually brought us together. So I love that you had that in the book. I was like, hey man, this quote follows me around. So I enjoyed it. And some of the business owners that you referenced, can you maybe mention a couple of these people that you had conversations with and learned from that you then talk about in the book? And
yeah, well, John Donahoe was the president CEO of eBay for a number of years, and I had interaction with him during the eBay separation of PayPal. John McCabe, who had a tremendous experience with in career with Wachovia, bringing their customer service up from one of the worst in the banking industry up to one of the very best, and then the 2008 crisis kind of hit and things changed there. But happily, PayPal got a hold of him, and I learned a tremendous amount from him. Just a number. There was a controller that hired me into. She's not specifically mentioned by name in the book, but the controller that hired me into Sunstrand was just incredible. Sue Brown basically, brought leadership and was my first experience out of college as to how, leaders looked at a department, interactions between, employees within a department and basically, looked for that operational excellence and helped coach employees up to it. It made a mark on my career.
Yeah, obviously had a lot of impact. And one more piece that I really want to talk about, you have a piece about the M&A process, which you obviously have experienced many times on very large scales. The separation of eBay and PayPal is no small feat. Obviously, Home Instead is making national news for just the sheer price tag on that sale, and good for them. I mean, what a great success story that is. But you talk about in your book, implementing not only the culture, but even technology and processes when you go and you decide to go purchase, or even if you're going to sell your company off, and how there's egos and whatnot that get in the way of that process. One person maybe thinks one's better than the other, or they designed this process and don't want to get rid of it. How do you deal with that? And that seems like there's some ethical questions within that as well. And maybe that from the leadership, they have to make sure to have, really great, clear communication.
Right.
So how did you deal with those instances, and what was it like for you?
Yeah. So part of my team in the eBay and PayPal timeframe directly managed those M&As coming into the company. I think during the years that I supported them, we probably bought 40 companies.
Wow.
Crazy.
Wow.
And one of them was actually during the eBay PayPal separation. We had just announced in September, and they had just announced then that they were buying Braintree, which was this company. I was like, okay, great.
Yeah.
But they had just themselves bought Venmo.
Oh, wow.
That
worked out pretty
and
well.
So that worked out pretty well.
Yeah.
But it was kind of like, all right, well, time out. We can't really do much more than get them on our email system and maybe the phone system and call it good for now until we get things separated. But as far as, the egos coming into it, I think it's really being clear at the point of M&A in terms of, hey, here's how we're going to operate after the purchase. In one instance back then, there was a purchase of a company where the acquired company almost came in like, hey, we're we've got all of our systems are the very best. We're the gold standard.
Yeah.
And that lasted for about 3 months, that mentality. And it's kind of like, well, yeah, but what if, or what, what about this? And then pretty soon you start peeling the onion back a little bit and find out that, they had a little bit more problems than what they let on at the sale.
Yeah.
The challenge there is getting people back to the table and saying, all right, well, wait a minute, now we understand both sides how things operate, and let's set the egos aside, and let's figure out the best course going forward for the company or for the organization.
Right.
And some companies have a real tough time doing that.
Yeah. I mean, I know obviously in financials, with TD Ameritrade was like my godsend. I loved their technology. And when Schwab purchased them, they said, we're purchasing them for their technology. And it's like all the technology is gone. It's not in existence anymore. And I say that openly because I tell them every chance I get, I'm like, what are you doing? It was so easy before. Right. But then from my perspective, they did sit me down. They did have the conversation with us and said, this is why we can't integrate those technologies. You know, they are a behemoth now, when TD Ameritrade was big in my view, but it's nothing close to what they are now. And it just doesn't scale. Right. Those processes didn't scale at the time. It's going to take a long time to get back to that point. And so I'll give them a little bit of a break, obviously, for that regard, because I don't know that, right? And I'm just a user. My user experience went downhill as a client, right? And then I don't quite get the reasons for those struggles, but once they're communicated to me, I give them grace and understand they're working on it. Right. Yeah. So all parts of your book. So Dar, thank you very much for joining me today, man. I really appreciate it. It was fun. Everybody out there, Total Experience. You can go look it up. Amazon is where you can find it right now. I know that you have, if you just Google Dar's name, you have a website there you can click on, you can get to the link. It also just came out on Kindle. So be sure to go check it out there if that's how you read your books. But man, thank you so much. I learned a lot from our conversation, and I can't wait to read the Total Experience 2 one day when it comes out.
Yeah, well, we'll think about that one maybe a little bit down the road here.
Yeah, once you're not full time a CIO and doing all those things. So awesome, Dar. Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, Blake. It's great.
Yeah, that was great. Thank you, Dar. Heck yeah,
this was good.
That was fun. I hope you enjoyed it.
It was exciting. Yeah.
I enjoyed. All right, this first one is going to be the intro to the Zach Olson episode. So, welcome to Ethics Walk the Talk. I am your host, Blake Peterson, and thank you so much for joining us today. I really appreciate every single one of you who listen and reach out. I'm so excited to introduce our guest, Zach Olson, president of Ronco Construction. This guy is a stud. You're going to love what he has to share. Zach's journey at Ronco began in 1999 when he worked alongside his father, Ron Olson, who founded the company back in 1976 with his mother. Over the years, Zach has been involved in every part of the business, from working in the field, managing day-to-day operations, and to the front office now, acting as the company's president. With a bachelor's degree in business administration from Nebraska Wesleyan University, Zach brings a practical, down-to-earth approach to leadership. And truly, you're going to hear him talk. I mean, he's a salt-of-the-earth guy. He's fantastic, a dude you can sit down with and really chat with forever, go get a beer with. So he's got firsthand knowledge of things like ethical succession planning and maintaining strong company culture through generational transitions. He's focused on fostering long-lasting relationships with small independent business partners and around our community, all of which have helped the Ronco family business to stay thriving. In our conversation today, we'll talk about how these values continue to shape Ronco Construction and what that means for ethical leadership in the construction industry and beyond. I hope you enjoy it. I hope you listen to the whole thing. Zach is incredible. He had a lot to share, and on with the show. All right. Next up, we have the signature event plug. So, all right, and last one is going to be the promo for Ethics Space. Okay. Ethics Space tickets are now available. The biggest single-day business ethics conference in the Midwest, I think probably the world. I don't know if we have any data on that, but it is gigantic. It's fantastic every year. Hosted at Creighton's Hyder College of Business in the 4th floor ballroom. The topic is cutting-edge ethics, featuring keynote speaker John Carreyrou. I hope I said that right, John. You're a great guy. I've heard you speak before. The Wall Street journalist who exposed the Theranos blood testing scandal. You might have seen this covered in documentaries about Elizabeth Holmes on your favorite streaming platforms. I know I've seen a couple. So John is going to come and deliver a keynote speech about what's been happening since the case was publicized. Later, he'll also be sitting on a panel as a journalist talking about changing. I'm going to do that one more time. I think I can deliver it better. So